Hello and welcome. This is going to be a lesson in how not to buy cameras and lenses. In late 2016, I bought a Sony A6000. I've been a Canon shooter for many years, but I was getting really tired and frustrated with the lack of small cameras on offer from Canon. Within 2 years, I swapped my 5D Mark III for an A7 III, and I started a collection of full frame and crop sensor lenses from Sony. In this video, I'm going to explain to you why this was such a stupid idea and why it took me another 2 years to finally fix it. I was a Canon shooter for over 20 years. The body has changed. I had a 5D Mark II, 5D Mark III, some of the crop bodies in there as well. But over that time, I built up quite a nice collection of lenses, predominantly zoom and prime L-series lenses, all of which were way beyond the capability of myself as a photographer. I took some really good pictures of my kids. I took a few really good shots of waterfalls and some of the landscape, and I did a couple of weddings as well. So I was very happy with my lenses and my cameras. I found the Canon offering for smaller cameras lacking. I tried some fixed lens ones like the G5. Then I looked at some of the interchangeable ones as well, and the one that I really liked a lot was the EOS M. And I'm talking here not about the M6, but I'm talking about the original EOS M. The one that everybody hated on. I really liked it. And with an adapter, you could seamlessly use all of the L-series lenses. Then I came across the Sony A6000. I've always liked Sony as a brand, but I never really saw them at that point as a suitable camera brand, and certainly not something that was going to take me away from my love of Canon. So in late 2016, I bought a Sony A6000, but I didn't feel like this was impinging on my love of Canon or really interfering with my relationship with my Canon equipment. This was just something for me to take on vacations, take on hikes with the family. It wasn't really going to make any difference to what I was doing with the rest of my camera gear, was it? But unfortunately, it was love at first sight. And when you have a love at first sight, it kind of interrupts some other relationships you may have had already, like my love of Canon. I love that retro look to the Sony camera bodies. Kind of reminds me of some of the 1980s SLR bodies that were around really before the days of autofocus coming along. It feels very solid. It feels very robust. Even though it probably isn't, it certainly feels that way. This was my first mirrorless camera, and the viewfinder, the fact it had a viewfinder was already fantastic. It's woefully low on resolution, but really, if you're talking about framing, composing, looking at the histogram and checking some of the other stuff on the camera and really seeing also what the exposure looks like in real time, you don't really need a high definition viewfinder to do that. However, a lot of other reviewers seem to get really hung up on the viewfinder on some of the Sony cameras, including the one we're going to talk about later. But as relationships go, you start on something new, something different, you kind of dip your toes in a bit further into that pool. So I bought a couple of Sony lenses, and this is a crop sensor body. So I bought some of the E-mount lenses for crop sensors. I got the 50mm 1.8, 20mm 2.8, the 10 to 18mm zoom lens, the 24 to 105 power zoom, the 18 to 135 zoom, and also the Sigma 16mm 1.4. Now, while I was having this affair with Sony and acquiring more and more Sony lenses on the side, my Canon equipment, I didn't sell it. It just got pushed back to the back of the closet and generally forgotten about. So a couple of years later on, the A6000 was replaced by an A6400, and the A6400 lasted, I think, about 2 weeks, and then I replaced that with a Sony A6600. Thank you, Amazon, for that awesome returns policy. Frankly, these days, that's the only reason I buy from Amazon is that returns policy. Now, around the same time as the A6600 came along, I decided that this fling with Sony should become a full-blown love affair. So I bought a Sony A7 III body. So you know what that meant? That meant I needed to buy some Sony lenses. At this point, the gloves were off. All my Canon equipment wasn't even getting taken out to dinner, let alone taken out and used as a camera. I was full-on, openly parading around with Sony. But I did trade the A7 III for an A7R4. The reasons for that and my thoughts on it, different video. But because of that, I felt I needed to upgrade my lenses. So along came the 1635 2.8, the 24 to 70 2.8, the 100 to 400 G Master, the 24mm 1.4, the 85mm GM 1.4. Now, if you're still watching this video, you're either drooling at all this gear or you're just laughing and shaking your head thinking, what an idiot. So I realized at this point, which is now about a year ago, maybe a year and a bit, two things. One, I'm a complete idiot when it comes to buying camera equipment. I also realized I was collecting and building two camera systems at the same time. I'm not talking here about Canon and Sony. I'm talking about Sony Full Frame and Sony APS-C crop. You see, one of the appeals of the Sony Full Frame body, the A7 III, was, well, it's the same mount as the smaller A6000 and A6600, so I could just use the lenses interchangeably. But I was finding that I could never really get it right in my head if I have this full frame lens on this crop body, what that's going to do to my depth of field, and of course what it's going to do to my frame size and my composition. I just really struggled with that. And I found that I was building collections of lenses in both APS-C size and full frame Sony. So I took a step back, cleared my head, figured out a plan, put that into action. So I took my Sony A6600, I took all of my crop sensor lenses. Every single item was separately sold on eBay, 7-day auction, starting price 99 cents. Can be quite scary sometimes, but generally I find it's much better to do that than it is to group everything together and to sell it to one of the companies that is a buyer and seller of camera gear. The money I got from that I used to buy another camera. But this time I didn't feel such an idiot. I bought the Sony A7C. Let me explain my logic here. Okay, the Sony A7C has the same sensor or very close to the same sensor as the Sony A7 III, which is a phenomenal sensor and a phenomenal camera. It has a viewfinder that's garbage, frankly, but it's better than the A6000, and frankly, that means it's good enough for what I'm doing with it, which is composing, checking exposure, and checking some of the other camera details as well. It has a different shutter to the A7 III, which I understand was redesigned to make it more compact, and it means also that the top shutter speed is half of what it was on the A7 III. So the reason I bought the A7C was to stop me buying, frankly, two sets of lenses with the same mount. Both the cameras I have, the A7R4 and the A7C, both have full frame sensors, and therefore I only have to buy one set of lenses, therefore it will save me money. What I didn't realize though was just how much I would use that A7C. It's my most frequently used digital camera ever. Here's what I found really good about the A7C. It has the sensor from the A7 III, or if not exactly the same, a very close variant of it, which is a beautiful sensor and certainly capable of doing anything that I would possibly want to do with it, photography or video-wise. It uses the same batteries as the A7R4, so I don't need a separate set of batteries, I don't need a separate independent charger, I can use stuff I already have. It uses all my beautiful GM lenses without any crop factor, and I don't have to worry about different depth of field either. It's great for filming on. In fact, I'm filming on it right now in 4K, 24 frames a second. It has a flippy out screen. At the time, I think it was the first Sony camera that had a flippy out screen. I find when I am reaching for a camera to take out on a hike, or I'm doing some quick photographs of my family, I find I'm reaching for the A7C. It is a lot more compact, so it's a lot more discreet. If you couple it with those two small compact G lenses, the 40 or the 24, it really is not that much bigger than the A6000 series. So it will fit in a very small camera bag. It can go over your shoulder very easily. It can go on a Peak Design wrist strap, which is how I typically use it. You don't feel like you're holding such a capable camera. Now, it's still an expensive camera. It was, I think, $1,700 when I bought it. It's a fraction of the price of the A7R4. And in the same vein as that, it is very discreet. You are generally able to take saleable pictures, high quality professional images while looking like a tourist, which means it's also very, very unlikely that you're going to be stopped and have it taken off you by security guards at some places where a full-size camera probably wouldn't be allowed in. Having said that, I think security guards these days are getting a lot better educated on the capability of smaller cameras, so I'm finding less and less that this rule still applies today. One other point, it makes an excellent backup body. So if I look at the best pictures I've taken the last 18 months or so, hands down, they're all taken on the A7C. And that's usually because I'm more likely to have that camera with me at the time that I'm taking some great photographs. Okay, now obviously it's not perfect. Well, what don't I like about it? Well, firstly, that viewfinder is not very good. It's just not. Compared to the A7R4, well, it's terrible. It's really horrible. But for what I'm doing with it, it really doesn't matter. So the only reason I bring it up is because if I'm switching between the A7R4 and the A7C, the first thing you notice is, oh gosh, this viewfinder is awful. It does lack some buttons and some dials, but for what I do, there's enough. And if there's a feature I need to access quickly, there are some custom buttons on it still, and there are enough buttons on the camera that I can program. So I haven't actually missed the dials as much as I thought I would do, but it is a negative. When you stick a GM lens on it, it doesn't feel balanced. And when it comes to recording, it has one card slot. Now, okay, all right, here I think I just have to stop. I'm not a professional photographer, but if I'm taking images that someone else is going to use and cherish, like portraits, like landscape photographs, I'm going to use the A7R4. It has all the capabilities. It has that wonderful croppable sensor, and it has two card slots as well, so I minimize my risk. But for anything else, I'm using the A7C, and I'm finding I'm more likely to be taking the A7C out at a time when my 5D3, my 5D2, or my A7 III would frankly have got left behind. So there you have it. If you're just looking for one camera and you want to get into full frame Sony, I'd probably actually still look at the A7 III because it's still available and it's a much lower price than the A7 IV, or just go for the A7 IV. I don't think I would recommend you go just to the A7C. The A7C to me is a very specific niche. You don't buy it because it's lower cost, because it's really not lower cost. But as a backup body for an existing Sony shooter, or for a travel body for an existing Sony shooter, this camera is the nuts. This is the one to get, hands down. That's it. So this was really a history lesson of stupidity. If you're a Sony shooter and you're looking for a second body, don't think about getting the A6000 series, get the A7C. Have a great day. I will see you in the next video.